It's pretty clear there are two very different worlds right now. I mean, one world for Donald Trump and his family and his billionaire buddies and his cabinet secretaries, too, and the other for just about everybody else. I mean, just take a look at some of these headlines. Here's one. It reads, Trump wants a new plane. Now so does Homeland Security Secretary Noem. I mean, who doesn't? That's right. It's not just Trump and his $400 million jet from Qatar. Not just that one. Homeland Security Secretary Kristi Noem, who already has access to a Gulfstream jet paid for by the government, by the way. She wants a new one. Why wouldn't she? A plane that a top Democratic lawmaker says would actually cost the U.S. taxpayers roughly $50 million. So that's how Trump and Kristi Noem think they deserve to travel and navigate the skies. Now, here's the headline from today that applies to, I guess, the rest of us. Denver air traffic control went dark for 90 seconds. And here's another one. Newark airport passengers warned of possible measles exposure by New Jersey health officials. So Trump and Kristi Noem are basically demanding new planes. And the rest of us are just hoping we land safely and also avoid infectious diseases in the process. That's, I guess, what's happening right now. And then there are Trump's tariffs. ProPublica just broke the news that on the day Trump announced his sweeping tariffs, Attorney General Pam Bondi sold between $1 and $5 million of Trump media stocks. $1 and $5 million. That's a lot of money, wherever it falls in there. You probably don't need me to remind you of how the stock market plummeted right after Trump announced those tariffs. So the stock Bondi sold fell 13% in the days after she sold it, which, considering she sold somewhere again in the ballpark of $1 to $5 million, which is quite a range, but it's a lot of money regardless of what it is, it means Attorney General Bondi avoided quite the haircut by doing that. So that was the headline for Pam Bondi, the Attorney General. Here was the headline today for basically everybody else about tariffs. Walmart warns it will raise prices within weeks because of tariffs. That's right. The largest retailer in the United States, the biggest grocery store in the country, is warning customers that prices are going up because of Trump's tariffs. I mean, when was the last time you remember a company warning customers about a price hike? That tells you how bad this could be. But unfortunately, that's the world basically everybody else has to live in. And hey, maybe Pam Bondi shops at Walmart too. I can't really say. But the point is, this is all a pattern. They get luxury jets, we get delays, fear, maybe the measles. They avoid the pain of tariffs while everyone else pays more for groceries. And there's a similar dynamic playing out right now in our legal system. I mean, the Trump administration wants one set of rules for themselves, which is pretty much an evergreen statement about them, and an entirely different set of rules for basically everybody else. Remember the first day of Trump's second term, which I know I am also trying to block out. But one of the first things Trump did was sign an executive order to end birthright citizenship. It was blatantly illegal. It was blatantly unconstitutional. Trump, of course, did it anyway. I guess he figured, why not unilaterally strip the right of citizenship from people who are born in this country? Guess what he figured. Now, within days, a federal judge blocked Trump's order. Then a second federal judge blocked the order. Then a third, then a fourth federal judge. So 4 federal judges all across the country all agreed that Trump's executive order was illegal and unconstitutional. And what those judges did is put in place a nationwide injunction. And that means that even though these judges made their rulings from courts in Washington State and Maryland and New Hampshire and Massachusetts, their rulings didn't just apply to those states. They blocked Trump's order nationwide. Now, Trump can appeal those decisions. He is appealing those decisions. But he doesn't want to wait for those appeals to be heard on their merits, because this isn't just about birthright citizenship at all. I mean, Trump wants the whole concept of nationwide injunctions, which is any ability of lower courts to put a stop to his illegal actions, gone altogether, completely gone. So today, Trump's Solicitor General was at the Supreme Court this morning, arguing that no matter how unconstitutional, no matter how illegal an order of the president's is, judges shouldn't be able to stop them nationwide. Basically, there should not be that check on his power at all. That's their argument. Instead, the way the Trump administration is proposing the law should work is that every individual who could be impacted by any government policy, no matter how illegal, no matter how unconstitutional, every single person should have to go to court to defend themselves, one by one. If they can't find a lawyer, too bad, and that's quite likely. If they can't afford a lawyer, also very likely, too bad. That's their argument. And here's how some of the liberal justices on the Supreme Court summed up Trump's position today.
Your argument seems to turn our justice system, in my view at least, into a catch-me-if-you-can kind of regime from the standpoint of the executive, where everybody has to have a lawyer and file a lawsuit in order for the government to stop violating people's rights. It seems to me that your argument says we get to keep on doing it until everyone who is potentially harmed by it figures out how to file a lawsuit, hire a lawyer, et cetera.
So when a new president orders that, because there's so much gun violence going on in the country, and he comes in and he says, I have the right to take away the guns from everyone, then people, and he sends out the military to seize everyone's guns. We and the courts have to sit back and wait until every named plaintiff gets, or every plaintiff whose gun is taken comes into court.
Now, I don't speak legalese exactly, so I'm hoping if I'm wrong here, any of our guests can correct me. But Trump's Solicitor General essentially responded to that gun hypothetical by saying, no, 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 when it's guns, that's a totally different deal. Again, I mean, it's one set of rules for them, and it's an entirely different set of rules for everybody else. The thing is, we really don't even have to make up hypotheticals. Nationwide injunctions have been around for a very long time, and both parties love to use them. When Joe Biden was in office, conservatives did what is referred to as judge shopping, and that basically means filing cases in areas of the country where they think the judges will agree with them. And you probably remember when a federal judge in Texas suspended the FDA approval of the abortion pill mifepristone, or when a federal judge in Texas blocked workplace anti-discrimination rights for transgender Americans, or when a federal judge in Texas blocked the Biden administration from ending Trump's Remain in Mexico policy. All of those rulings were nationwide injunctions, and all of them came from one single, incredibly conservative judge, Judge Shopping. Republicans didn't seem to have any issues with nationwide injunctions back then. They shopped for the person who would do them. But now that Trump is in power, it's an entirely different story. And look, Democrats use nationwide injunctions, too. You might remember that a nationwide injunction is what blocked Trump's travel ban at the very beginning of his first term. Nationwide injunctions are kind of a double-edged sword. I mean, figuring out how to prevent individual radical judges at lower-level courts from unilaterally shaping U.S. policy and U.S. law nationwide is a bipartisan concern. People from both parties want reform there. But there is a big, huge, enormous freaking Trump factor to consider here. When George Bush, just to put this in perspective, and these numbers I read this morning, and I thought they made the point very clearly. When George W. Bush was in office, federal judges issued just 6 nationwide injunctions against his policies total over 2 terms. Federal judges issued 12 against Obama during his 2 terms and 14 against Biden. In Trump's first term, federal judges issued 64 injunctions. In the 116 days Trump has been in office this term, he's already at 39. That's quite a pace. And right now, nationwide injunctions are also the only thing blocking the Trump administration's attempt to do everything from end the temporary protected status for Venezuelan migrants, withholding federal money from schools that have diversity, equity, and inclusion programs, freezing all federal grants distributed by the entire federal government altogether. Trump orders his administration to do illegal and unconstitutional things at a pace and scale we have literally never seen before from a president. So if the Supreme Court does what Trump wants and gets rid of nationwide injunctions, that check on his power, a very important check on his power, would be gone. Now, like I said, the Biden administration faced its own share of nationwide injunctions. President Biden disagreed with a lot of them. He said so, but he did abide by them. He appealed the decisions and let the process play out in the courts. But in an absolutely jaw-dropping moment, I have no other way to describe it, at the Supreme Court today, Trump's Solicitor General said that that might not always be how the Trump administration does it. They might follow court orders, they might not. Depends if they agree.
You resisted Justice Kagan when she asked you whether the government would obey within the Second Circuit a precedent. I'm distinguishing between opinions and judgments here. Did I understand you correctly to tell Justice Kagan that the government wanted to reserve its right to maybe not follow a Second Circuit precedent, say, in New York, because you might disagree with the opinion?
Our general practice is to respect those precedents, but there are circumstances when it is not a categorical practice. It is, and that is not
This
just a new policy.
administration's practice or the longstanding practice of the federal government? And I'm not talking about in the Fourth Circuit, are you going to respect a Second Circuit? I'm talking about within the Second Circuit. And can you say, is that this administration's practice or a longstanding one?
As I understand it, longstanding
Really?
policy of the Department of Justice. Yes, that we generally, as it was phrased to me, generally respect circuit precedent, but not necessarily in every case.
Not necessarily in every case. So that was conservative Justice Amy Coney Barrett, one of the more interesting people on the Supreme Court, who seemingly responded in complete disbelief at what the president's lawyer was saying. They'll follow the law generally. As the old saying goes, for my friends, everything, for my enemies, the law.